Well, we're thinking about that quest, and we're talking about the value story and the power and the importance of it. How or what's the best way to relay it to the people you want to be in front of? What vehicles? Is it just something that travels, that precedes you, that you put in writing, you put on LinkedIn? Is it all the above? Saundra, let's start with you, then we'll turn to Judy as well. How do you actually convey what you're about to the people that matter?
Um, well, there's two ways it needs to get communicated. Okay. And then there's three ways it's going to happen. Okay. The two ways it's going to get communicated are verbally, meaning the stuff you say, and the stuff that represents you when you're not in the room. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I just need to get in the door. I just need to somehow figure out how to get in the door. You would be surprised that most people don't miss out on opportunities because they didn't have the right connections. They miss out on the opportunity because that verbal communication and the collateral communication wasn't consistent. I'll give you the three ways and then I'll give you an example. So, how are you actually going to get the conversation? There's only three ways it's going to happen. It's either going to be a random chance meeting. And yes, you would be surprised. All the landing stories that I've collected over 25 years of doing this, I've got chance meeting stories that are hilarious, like standing in line talking to somebody at Starbucks, and all like three of those, believe it or not, but over 25 years. But that's not the majority of it. It's hard to have random chance meetings. Just being out and about. Not everybody likes to talk to strangers and going to networking events. I'm not, if you're just going to go to a networking event with a bunch of people who are also looking for a job, that's difficult. If I were going to go to a networking event or if I were going to go to an event, I always want to make sure it's going to be worth my time. And if it's going to be worth my time, it's going to be in topic in my world and things that we're talking about in that world. Or it's going to be something that I'm passionate about. So maybe it's a nonprofit organization I'm dealing with. But here's the issue when you're going for the chance meeting. Don't make it purely chance. Go to events where you can look up who's going to be there ahead of time. And if you're like my husband, he looks them up on LinkedIn and then he makes a card on the face and a little, he actually will have his 3x5 cards ready to go. And he's already
Wow.
got the 5 or 6 people that he knows he wants to get in front of. Okay. We'll just put that in the category of chance meeting for right now. But then the other two ways, it's either going to be inbound or outbound. Now, if you look at the data of, the 80 plus people that get a job through network, most of them do not get in the door through a first degree connection. Most of them get in the door through a second or third degree connection, which is the opposite of earlier in their career when they had bosses that knew about them. And now, like Judy said, those people are in the job or retired. So it's mostly the second and third degree connections that we're going for, the people who don't really know your story. That's why that collateral and verbal has to be on point. So there's only going to be two more ways. Either inbound, meaning they're finding you on LinkedIn, which is not just having a great profile, it means having an optimized profile. Optimized for what? Your value proposition. If you were a business and you were going to launch I don't know, selling widgets or whatever, you'd want to have a website so people can find you. And then you'd also want to have outbound. Outbound is where you do the research up front and figure out the people you want to get in touch with, and then come up with a strategy to actually get in front of those people that may involve a combination of your verbal and a collateral and send an email. And I have to say that reaching out to a total stranger has never been easier because all you have to do is convey a real message. There is so much spam, and especially on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is selling a lot of Sales Navigator and a lot of these template tools, and they can just like spam tons of people if you're willing to pay the money. And there is just so much generic spam, and they're putting these messages together with AI. We're all recognizing it, we're all seeing the same stuff, and we ignore it. when you make a message that is specific to the problem you think they're having, or the problem that you solve, or the person that that recommended you, don't lead with, hey, I saw we have so and so in common. Everybody does that. But if you have a real message, that will stand out and shine. And that will sometimes be a faster conversation that you will get than if you're waiting for Evelyn to introduce you to Tim, that's going to introduce you to John.
Mm.
Because that direct message, you have a problem. I think I can solve it. This is actually what I do. Is that something you guys are planning on doing? Even if not now, but later, we should chat. Beautiful.
And the only other thing, and Sandra, that was excellent. The only other thing I would add is that when she
Thank you,
talked
Judy.
about your collateral, when she talked about like your collateral, um, your collateral is a reflection of you. So even those networks that might know you intimately will be a bit reluctant to share collateral that doesn't look like it's at the professional level for which you are at. So in many cases, people just, what Sandra's saying, I think of it more of like a laundry list of all the things they did, but then they never really tell me, were you successful at doing it? Keep in mind, I'm looking at all these resumes, and the research says that the average recruiter is only spending, my data said 6.25 seconds, but Ladder just did the same research and asked, how much time are recruiters actually spending looking at resumes? And they came back with 7 seconds. So I know my 6 to 7 seconds is right. Now, I want to preface that because after decades of HR, I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that HR is callous about looking at resumes. What it is the sheer volume of people that we're dealing with. We don't have the time. So we've got to be able to see what we're looking for. We're scanning initially. And that's what I trained other recruiters on. Scan initially because just background story, recruiters, after about 25 to 30 requisitions, I have to reallocate the work because I can't have 25, 30 managers with people applying all at different times. And I've worked at places like Harvard University where you don't even have to advertise. People are just applying. They're monitoring our website like crazy. So with that in mind, I've got to make sure that the recruiter can keep that flow going of getting through these things. So you've got to make sure that you're telling that story early on. And sometimes with the executive level positions, I'm also looking for foundational work. So that's why once I see what I want up front, then I'm going to take as much time as possible. I'm going long beyond. It might take me 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to do maybe a 20-minute phone call with you because I want to flush you out before I present you to senior management. Because keep in mind, again, I'm only going to bring about 2 or 3 strong candidates. So with that in mind, your collateral is really critical. It's got to tell your story in a way that really impresses upon me that you've got what we're looking for. And you're only applying to jobs that you want anyways. You've already done that value prop to understand what you're passionate about, what types of jobs you should be going after. So now you got to make sure you get into the process, and that's one way of doing it. That collateral is pretty critical.
Hey, Judy. So here's a little good juxtaposition here because Judy comes from the HR side and I come from the recruiter side. So the third party search, when HR says, okay, I'm going to pay you some money to go find some people, of which Harvard was one of my clients. Woohoo! Okay. Here's the funny thing. Okay. Collateral conversation. We're talking about that. Now, me as a recruiter, what I'm going to spend most of the time doing is searching LinkedIn. I pay $10,000 a year for LinkedIn Recruiter, and I'm going to use that to basically use this database of 1 billion people as my own personal database. And I'm going to filter it down to the top people, and I'm going to make my short list, and I'm going to find the exact people I want to talk to, and then I'm going to call them. I have a phone call with somebody, well, message them and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this phone call. I have a phone call with somebody, and this happened so many times. And then I've heard, a lot of the other strategists that work with us that have, been in like retained search and all that stuff too. I call them and I say, so here's the opportunity. Here's what the client is looking to do. And they go, oh, wow, that is perfect. That is exactly what I do. And they have this great messaging. And I'm like, whew, this is going to be good. Can you send me your resume so I can send you to the client. Here's the client. They say, yeah, sure, fantastic. And then the recruiter crosses the fingers. It says, please let that resume tell the story. Now, here's the problem. Most people end up sending a resume that doesn't tell that story. And that will be the last time you hear from that recruiter, because the recruiter is not going to put themselves on the line with Harvard University that they worked 6 months to get the business of.
That's a little personal there. So
Yep.
6 months to get the business. Because I will tell you, Harvard had a strict rule. We do not use agencies. I finally went business law. I want to look good, right?
Right.
I want to look good. I am not going to send over some resume and say, well, they're really great, but here's why it doesn't say that. No, you just go on to the next person. And now they actually have a phrase for it. They call it when somebody's not packaged. So when you're not packaged, they move on to the next person.
And then let me
Judy, I wish you were there. But that was way back in the day.
And what's critical about what Saundra's saying is that keep in mind that in the 80s, when I was doing, search and stuff, we went and used a lot of these retained or contingency search firms. But keep in mind, everybody on this call, listen, they're working for me. I'm paying 30 to 35% of the first year's salary. So I'm setting aside a chunk of change for this position. Now that LinkedIn came into play in the last, decade or so, now those executive search firms are still there, but unless your background is exactly what they're looking for, you're of no interest to them. They have to satisfy me, the client who's paying the money. And so some people will say, well, I'm going to reach out to these recruiters or this executive search firm. Maybe there'll be a perfect match, but the chances are not so much. And so now with LinkedIn, people are going to LinkedIn first. When I need to do a confidential search, I'm on LinkedIn looking for people. Because I want to try to save that $100,000, $80,000 to $100,000 I have to set aside for that one executive hire. So LinkedIn is pretty critical in today's market. Search firms are still out there; they're still good, but just keep in mind they're working for me, the client. They're not working for you, the applicant.
And to give a little context too, as far as getting in front of decision makers, like with the recruiters, that's what happened. The whole business kind of shifted because there was a time, and I didn't start recruiting till the 90s, but there was a time when if you needed to get that ideal executive, you had to go to a recruiter.
Yes.
Because you really didn't have like all the you had like a few people in your Rolodex, but then LinkedIn comes around since 2004 now. It's been 21 years. And you don't need the recruiter to go access the database anymore. You can reach out to people. You can, so when I first started recruiting, if somebody like Judy were to call me and say, hey, we want you to work on this executive search, maybe they have reached out to 2 or 3 people on their own. Okay. Nowadays, if a 250K search or higher goes out to paid search, you can bet that those 6 to 7 stakeholders and everybody in HR has reached out to 30 to 40 people on their own.
Yes.
Okay. So less searches go out to paid search now. That means it doesn't really hold the weight for the business model that they used to have of these big search companies. So now these search companies, they kind of work on lower level positions. So what happened to all the executive recruiters? Well, they're like, hey, I can go work in my house and I can buy a LinkedIn membership, a LinkedIn recruiter, and I can fill 3 or 4 jobs a year and make a decent living. Yeah, that's what I did, 2008 to 2017. That's exactly what I did. And only working 3 or 4 searches a year. It's just me and a LinkedIn recruiter membership. And so now most of the executive recruiters that you really do want to get in front of are actually what we call solo recruiters that have relationships with these people over the years, which means that there's no good strategy for trying to identify all the recruiters that could possibly find you and then pitch yourself to them to potential. That would be like the hardest waste of time ever. The strategy is to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is optimized so that they find you.